fortunate to be able to present a number of these things I want to present to you today at their annual conferences, as well as the transpersonal section for the British Psychological Society, which I was quite pleased about. So what are we going to do in this talk today? Now, I should just point out before I say that I'm always very suspicious about when I'm given the time slot after lunch. Because, you know, the lights go down, you've got a full belly, you know, and every once in a while I'll hear the odd snore or the odd, so to speak. And I just wanted to point out to you, just to keep your mind a bit alert here, there's a chair on the stage, okay? And that chair, hopefully, will be occupied by someone here later on, okay? All right, and I'll explain a bit more about that, but I thought I'd just mention that to you, just to keep that stress level up a little bit, to stop you from falling asleep, all right? So let's have a look at what we're going to be talking about. So what I'd like to do in this presentation is sort of like twofold, but threefold in many ways. And what I'd like to do is provide you with a summary of the literature that currently exists supporting paranormal beliefs, and in particular communication with the discarnate or the afterlife or what have you. Because obviously from my background and my experience, this is something that really is of interest to me. And it's evident there's in the general society, you know, in society generally, there's a particular view or perceived consensus that the scientific community is promoting, but which I believe is not telling the full story. And that seems to be quite evident in many of the themes that we've heard over this weekend. And then lastly, I'll go through some of the research that I've conducted, in particular with spiritualist trance mediums, because trance mediumship is something I find fascinating. And what I refer to as the neurophysiology, basically what's going on in the brain of a trance medium. Is there anything in there of interest? You know, my wife often says the same thing about me, actually. Is there anything of interest going on in there? But, you know, before obviously demonstrating how we could perhaps use some of this technology. Is there too many pops? That's better. Okay. Too many pops. So before we actually look at the neurophysiology, and before, as I said there, it's over to you. Okay? So because what I like to do is, with the research, I like to do what we call field research. Now, field research is that we don't take people into the laboratory and strip them of their sort of like individuality. What I like to do is use equipment and technology while the medium is demonstrating live, if you like, you know, actually doing a real demonstration of some description. And because of that, the technology we use can be commercially available and allows us to see some interesting things, but most importantly, as I said at the start, it allows us to take ownership of the knowledge, ownership of finding out things about mediumship, about our own experiences, not relying on the scientific community for everything, okay? So and as I'm sure it has become apparent to many of people here, it's become apparent to me, and perhaps to some of you here today, that there seems to be a large section of society that are reluctant to want to think for themselves and prefer to outsource their thinking to others who are often more than willing to think on their behalf. But the trouble with that is, in doing so, you're only given part of the information, and you're only given the information that those that you impart your responsibility of thinking to want to give you. As I'm sure many of us have seen over the last, where is that? Here we go. As I'm sure many have seen over the past 2 years, any academic or researcher that dares to speak out or tries to put forward an alternative perspective that then that's designated as fact by some quango of scientists are frequently censored, in the mainstream media and with scientific journals, often refusing to publish their studies and research papers. It has often been known within the field of parapsychology for authors to be chastised by the editors of journals for even daring to send them a paper that would support the paranormal in some way. And as well as that, I'm sure we've all come across the idea of these guerrilla skeptics or skeptical pressure groups who often will influence journals, editors of journals, if they find there's been a paper that's been published that doesn't match the consensus of orthodox scientific thought. In all, academics and scientists who attempt to promote their work, promoting paranormal beliefs, or to even suggest there is something of interest, will often experience and encounter censorship in some form. Of course, there is literature out there that doesn't support, for example, communication with the deceased. Still, for me, the emphasis should be on balance, and science should endeavour... What? Bet they're in. You kept quiet. No one was prepared to tell me, were they, eh? Okay, what a rotten lot you all are. Okay, of course there's literature out there that doesn't support paranormal beliefs, but there's also a lot of literature out there that does, okay? And what I want to do this afternoon is just to present to you a summary of some of the literature out there that does actually support, in our case, sort of like paranormal beliefs, and in particular with mediumship. So what I'm going to go through now are some of the psychological theories as to why why people believe in the paranormal. Okay. Now, what I would say to you first of all is, please don't take this personally. Okay, that's my little warning there, okay? Because as we will see later on, some of these theories, some of these ideas aren't quite as they make out. But these are some of the psychological explanations as to why people have paranormal beliefs or hold paranormal beliefs. So you have something called the worldview hypothesis. And here, the idea is that individuals who hold paranormal beliefs see the world through a contemplative and reflective perspective, endorsed by other internal truths. Skeptics take this to mean that believers of the paranormal tend to hold beliefs ungrounded in reality, preferring inner feelings and perspectives. So that's what's called the worldview hypothesis. And as it says there, what they're actually saying here is that people who believe in paranormal beliefs, so if you have a paranormal belief, basically your belief, and most of your life perhaps, is a belief that's ungrounded in reality, and one that prefers actually how you feel about things as opposed to objective reality. Well, that's what they say. The other theory is something called the psychodynamic hypothesis. And here, the beliefs, they say, are held because they serve a psychodynamic need within the individuals. So skeptics say that people who have paranormal beliefs are psychologically deviant or dysfunctional. How many of us feel deviant and dysfunctional? I'm not supposed to put your hand up. Like they say, you always get one, don't you, in the group, eh? Always get one. Okay, so that's another theory as to why we hold paranormal beliefs. This is the real classic one that you will come across all the time. It's called the cognitive deficit hypothesis. Okay, and here, they pull no punches with this one. Under this view, the believer in the paranormal is held to be illogical, irrational, credulous, uncritical, and foolish. Believers of the paranormal have supposed cognitive deficits with memory abilities, intelligence, imagination, with poor education in science or other specialist skills. So, according to these hypotheses, an alleged scientific consensus would have us view a paranormal believer as someone who is irrational, uneducated, using paranormal beliefs to fulfill a psychological need, perhaps to be accepted in a group. They're likely also to have memory deficits and other cognitive deficits. Put your hands up if that fits you. And who, let's be honest, who wants to be labelled with such qualities? So is it really understandable, and would it not also be quite appealing not to be recognised as someone who believes or takes an interest in the paranormal? And, without wanting to step on some toes over the last few years, I kind of wonder if we could think of another example over the past couple of years where the scientific community and media took special effort to ridicule and label a particular group of individuals as to influence or psychologically nudge them towards a certain behaviour. Criticisms of such measures are in abundance. For example, they don't take into account how beliefs change. They don't take into account how we as individuals change. As a psychologist, I know we're not fixed, we're dynamic. We're growing, our personality's growing, our psyche's growing all the time. We're certainly not a fixed entity in time. And this is another problem with a lot of these measures and a lot of these psychological explanations, because very few of them have what we call longitudinal validity, in the sense that, you take a group of people, you ask them questions about whether they believe in the paranormal, you ask them also then, what their intelligence level is or what have you. But of course, things change all the time. If I go back, for example, over 25 years ago, go back to 25 when I was in my early teens, if someone said to me, you would believe that you can talk to the dead, I'd think they were bonkers, If I go back now, and think to myself, do I believe in Bigfoot? I know as a child I did, but I'm not quite so sure now. We change. And these are the things that these measures never take into account as we grow and move forward. So from my perspective, and it's not just, myself saying this, that there are many, many researchers now and educators and academics who are also speaking out and pointing out that these sweeping generalizations don't take into account the vast amounts of literature that now challenge these sorts of myths or hypotheses, or these theories as to why people believe in the paranormal. So, I know from my own experience, of mediumship, of just seeing everyone here today, and the time that I came in 2019, I think it was, I've come to understand that paranormal believers come from a wide section of society, from different social classes, from a different range of academic and professional backgrounds, and with a rich diversity of personality traits. To suggest every paranormal believer, for example, has cognitive deficits resulting in holding such beliefs is just simply not true, and just bunk them. There's actually a swear word there, but I thought I wouldn't say that. Just bunk them, and basically an affront to real science. But that being said, that won't necessarily stop those who are desperate at promoting such myths as fact. The literature has become so overwhelming in not supporting these hypotheses we were talking about a minute ago, that perhaps kind of in a panic, Michael Shermer, who you see the picture there, some of you may recognise as the director of the Skeptic Society, wrote an article in the Scientific American in 2002 trying to explain, get this, now why smart people believe in paranormal and weird things. So apparently now it's not only the uneducated and those with some sort of cognitive deficit, allegedly, it's also now smart people that believe in the paranormal. Interestingly, in this article, Michael Shermer doesn't actually provide any detailed explanations as to why smart people believe in weird things, but actually argues that there is one reason he believes, and this is it. Now get this. He believes the reason smart people believe in the paranormal is because they haven't had enough scientific training. So in other words, regardless of your cognitive, educational or professional background, if you believe in the paranormal, you need more scientific training. That's what it is. To a point where you stop believing in the paranormal and then comply with the current scientific consensus. But of course, that's problematic, because what do we mean by the current scientific consensus? Because by the very virtue of the scientific method, the consensus is always moving, is always evolving, and it's being updated and replaced as new discoveries are made. Ironically, I don't recognise this position, as you may have gathered, as being scientific at all, but it's rather a position, ironically, demonstrating a range of psychological biases which the skeptics place upon the paranormal believers. Biases such as commitment bias, biases such as confirmation bias. For those who don't know, commitment bias is an unconscious phenomenon whereby when someone is so invested in a belief system, regardless of what other information is presented to them, and even if they think they're accommodating that new information, they will still hold the same view, because the investment they've made in that belief is so great they can't turn back, essentially. Commitment bias. It actually comes from studies done in the 1980s looking at project management. That's where it comes from, because there was a period of time where project managers were constantly delivering or failing on projects, and researchers wanted to know, well, why are project managers still going down the same road? They know they're going to overspend, they know they're not going to deliver the project on time, and what they found was that the investment that the project manager had in that project meant they felt they couldn't step back, they felt they couldn't move forward. So it's a commitment bias. And then, of course, we talked about confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is where you see the things that suit your perceived understanding of the world. So you will see things. I'm sure we've all come across this before in terms of confirmation bias. For example, perhaps you've bought a new dress, and it's a new dress, and all of a sudden you walk down the street and you find 5 people wearing the same dress or what have you. You see these things out there. So I'm sure, going through these theories, that we can, with confidence, rule out the generalization that people who believe in the paranormal are in some way deficient. So if you believe in the paranormal, what I would suggest to you is don't let generalizations prevent you from holding such beliefs, because, as I said, there is no good reason why we hold these beliefs, other than we're unique individuals with unique experiences who have come up to the conclusion that we do. So let's have a quick look now at after-death communication. in other words, referred to as mediumship, because this is where I come from in particular. And again, when you think of a medium or think of a psychic, or so to speak, the media love to portray it in a certain way. But again, it's just half the story, as we'll see. So let's have a look, first of all, just some sort of definitions. When we talk about life after death, and we talk about survival in particular, there are three commonly explored routes. The first one is deathbed visitations. What we mean by that is researchers are often going to hospices and so forth, and deathbed visitations are those accounts that people who are terminally ill will see loved ones before they pass. Now, they will see their husband, they'll see their wife, or sometimes they will see strangers who come to them moments before passing, maybe even up to 2 weeks before passing, and will come to them and put their mind at rest and say to them, your time here is up, but we don't want you to worry, we will be here for you. And there have been many, many accounts of deathbed visitations. Another alternative way, which I know we've got to talk about tonight, so it's well worth making sure we're here tonight about this, is near-death experiences. And lastly, what I'm going to be talking about in particular, that of mediumship. So what do we mean by mediumship? Well, the definition by Rock, 2013, was that mediumship is an ability of an individual known as a medium to regularly communicate with deceased personalities. But surely it's just a mental illness. Now that's the type of thing that the society wants you to believe. And a common myth promoted by some of the scientific community is that mediumship and mediums are actually just experiencing bouts of psychosis. Or as we've already said, maybe they've got some cognitive deficit in some way or some other mental pathology. But again, what we don't hear much about are the studies that contradict this perception. For example, this study was done in Brazil with spiritism mediums, trance mediums. And here you can see, it was published in 2022, and you can see here that they were looking at the cognitive health of these mediums and concluded the cognitive functioning of subjects who practice trance mediumship in Brazil is associated with cognitive health. No sign of any psychopathology or anything like that. Well, what about this one? Done by Elizabeth Roxburgh and Chris Rowe from Northampton University in the UK. They did a whole host of questionnaires and surveys looking at, I think it was about 80 mediums, it says there, 80 mediums, questioning them about their mental health, their well-being, and all sorts of things like that. And they actually found that mediumship is not associated with any incidents of dissociative experiences or pathology. And we mean here mental pathology. In fact, further down in their paper, they actually state that, according to their results, mediums enjoy a better level of mental well-being than the general population as a whole. And I always laugh at that, because whenever someone who doesn't believe in mediumship comes up to me and says, no, you're just mad, I kind of now know that actually the chances are they're more mad than me. So it gives me that sort of feeling that we're not, there's nothing wrong with it. But you see, again, there's just two examples, but there are many, many examples out there showing that mediumship has nothing to do with a psychopathology, mental illness, or anything like that whatsoever. But again, much of the knowledge we have comes from journalists and other media sources such as newspapers. And of course, what gets reported is often taken by many as being the truth. And again, a theme that has been constant throughout this weekend. I've lost count the number of times I've reminded family and friends to take a more, so we say, questioning perspective of the accounts being reported by the tabloids and other media sources. But of course, the same way is true with psychics and mediums. You know, very often you won't ever see a newspaper report that says this medium gave wonderful evidence of the continuation of life. What you'll see is a tabloid newspaper saying fake medium or fraud medium, you know, attacks the vulnerable or what have you. And you know, what is reported by journalists is often very sweeping generalisations and, shall I say, uninformed statements masquerading as truth, with mediums often referred to as fake, fraud, charlatans and so forth. Again, labelling is again reminiscent of techniques used by organisations to deter you from exploring the reality of survival, to deter you from investigating thinking for yourself. For example, found this one online a couple of days ago. Now, there were plenty to choose from, but I found this one because I thought this was quite interesting. This is an article written about a particular Netflix series that was following a particular celebrity psychic or celebrity medium. And the article was published by the Office for Science and Society, and it's called Separating Sense from Nonsense, which I thought was quite ironic, actually. And here, you know, it's an article written by a blogger, a journalist, Jonathan Jarry, who's, I think he's got a degree in microbiology, but certainly has no experience researching the parapsychology or the paranormal in any way. And it says here, as a skeptic, I feel it's important to first confront the central claim made by this show that celebrity psychic can get impressions from the dead. And here's a throwaway comment, throwaway statement. There's no good evidence that the dead talk to us. What can play the role of mediumship, however, are two strategies called cold reading and hot reading. And while the former can appear banal, when described, it can be very convincing in the right hands, especially if the sitter, who the medium reads, is vulnerable and misremembers the details of the session. So you can see so many throwaway comments there. You know, there's no good evidence that the dead can talk to us. What we actually do are two techniques called cold reading and hot reading, and that the people that come to us are vulnerable. So it's already painting a picture of what's going on. But of course, it's only half the story, and it's completely misinformed. You know, but then, you know, the skeptics would have us believe that what mediums do are what's called cold readings and hot readings. Now, I just want to explain, if you haven't heard these terms before, what they mean. Cold reading refers to things such as the Barnum effects. Basically, cold reading is I'm looking at the person and I'm reading their body language. And I'm giving generalizations, you know. So, you know, a lady comes to me that's 85. Your father's in the spirit world. Well, that's a pretty good bet, isn't it? You know, and you know your father's in the spirit world. You know, and knowing about the history of the UK, and there's some military connections with him or army connections. You know, these sort of generalisations. You know, you've had a bad back. You know, all this type of thing. These are the things that the skeptics say mediums do. They read the body language, maybe ask a few questions, you know, do you understand this? Have you got an idea about that? You know, basically eliciting information from the person. Hot reading is slightly different. What the skeptics say there is that what happens is the medium researches the person coming for the sitting. So somehow the medium knows who's coming to have a private sitting with them, and in the process of them coming, they Google them, look up their history, look up their genealogy, look up their family tree, and all sorts of other information like that to get information about them. And then what they do is they recite that information as being allegedly from the spirit world. So that's hot reading. Hot reading is about researching the person before the person comes to do the sitting. In both cases, what the skeptics are saying here is that we rely on prior knowledge or the person, the sitter themselves. to get the information. But the trouble is, that again is not the complete story. For example, there are organizations like the Wimbridge Research Center in Arizona, the US, that have done immense amounts of work with mediums. And in their case, their mediums they've worked with have gone through about 5 levels of selection criteria, doing a reading, doing a sitting for someone over the phone, doing another sitting over the phone, scoring the sitting. Now, there's a whole host of selection criteria down that they use. And this organisation is publishing paper after paper, arguing the case. Actually, mediums don't use cold reading, don't use hot reading techniques. Something else is happening. And in particular, there's this paper here that was published in 2015. And again, what I'm going to present to you this afternoon is just a small snipping of the evidence out there that support mediumship in particular. In this particular paper here, there's 20 mediums were involved and did 86 readings in total. The readings were conducted over the telephone. Between the medium and the researcher, neither the medium nor the researcher knew at the time who the reading was for. So it means by blinded conditions. So the idea being that if there was genuine communication, then the recipient would get both the reading that was for them and a decoy reading as well. And then the recipient would have to do is score the readings. And the idea being that if it's genuine mediumship, then obviously the reading that was for them will score higher than the decoy reading. And they found, because experimental conditions of this study eliminated normal sensory sources for the information mediums report, non-local source, however controversial, seems the most likely explanation for the accuracy of their statements. So what they were saying here is that, okay, you say mediums use hot readers and cold readings, but we've got an example here of 20 mediums who didn't know who their recipient were that they were doing the readings for, and yet they still got accurate information. And what about this one? There was a talk earlier about meta-analysis. I think it was yesterday. Someone was talking about meta-analysis. A meta-analysis is a research tool where basically you gather all the information over a certain period of time, and you basically put it in a big pot, and you look at the general conclusions from it. Okay, and in this particular case, these researchers looked at 19 peer-reviewed papers about mediumship between 2001 and 2019, and concluded the results of the meta-analysis support the hypothesis that some mediums can retrieve information about deceased persons through unknown means. Now, again, a meta-analysis is regarded by many as the gold standard. For example, NICE, the National Institutes for Health and Care Excellence, for example, will use, for example, a meta-analysis to gather all sort of information, evidence for perhaps a particular clinical intervention, perhaps evidence to use a certain drug, or what have you. So it's a well-recognised method of gathering data and forming an overall picture of what's going on. But we've got this example here showing that researchers out there are saying, mediums are not doing cold readings or hot readings in the main. But it gets even better, because in June last year, there was a slight turn. Now, do you notice, I should go back a second, if you notice that the last few papers talk about a non-local source or unknown means, it's because as researchers, as a scientific community, we know the information is coming from somewhere. It's not coming from the imagination of the medium or anything like that, but it's coming from somewhere. But they're still just a little bit careful about saying it's coming from dead people, okay, for obvious reasons. But that changed. because in this study, which was a triple-blind protocol, again, neither the medium, the researcher, nor the recipient knew each other, knew which reading was going to each other, what have you, okay? What happened was, their conclusion was, this study provides further evidence that some mediums are able to obtain information about deceased people knowing only the deceased name and with no interaction from the sitters. It also supports hypothesis that in some cases, the source of the information are the deceased themselves. When I read that, I almost fell back off the chair, because I thought, my goodness, we have a scientist who's now actually going out there and saying, where can this information be coming from? So I actually contacted the author, Patrizio Trasaldi, in Italy. And I contacted the author and asked him, why he felt the deceased could be the source of the information. And in a very matter-of-fact way, pointed out that, in the study, we've controlled for all the external possibilities. We've controlled for them. And so that only leaves non-physical explanations. And, in his opinion, the most likely being the deceased. So in a very rational, logical approach, it wasn't through, a religious experience that the researcher was having. He was following a very logical, rational approach and said, look, I've eliminated all these possibilities, these variables, these confounding factors, but it only leaves one possibility, the deceased themselves. But again, nevertheless, the skeptic, this is what we find with a lot of this research, you go backwards and forwards with it, but that's what science is about. But nevertheless, we can see there's good quality evidence suggesting that mediums are able to get information from non-local sources. We need to speed up a little bit. Non-local sources, including the deceased. But skeptics will still say, and you probably hear this, no, come on. Perhaps mediums believe that they're communicating with the deceased, but isn't it really just an overactive imagination? Well, guess what? Researchers have explored that too. And they've found, when they've explored this, they've also found that actually it wasn't relating to an overactive imagination, because they found, using EEG equipment, that the brain states that the mediums go into is very different to when they were maybe telling a story or fantasizing about something. So again, we have a study now that says actually it's not the medium's imagination at all, but a very much a distinct mental state. Right, moving on. So what I find about that paper was quite interesting, because from a personal perspective, I'm fascinated about what goes on in the medium's brain. I'm kind of interested to know what goes on with the brain anyway, so a medium's brain is even more interesting. And I have, in a sense, I suppose, a personal reason for being interested, because as I said, as well as being a scientist and a researcher in the paranormal with mediums, I'm also a spiritualist medium. And in my own development and awareness of the deceased, I also like to rationalize what I'm experiencing. The amount of mediums I come across who, will work on platform, will give wonderful evidence of the continuation of life, but there's still that niggling doubt. We're still very logical and practical individuals. So when I started exploring spiritualist trance myself, I was left wanting to understand what's going on. I wanted to understand what's going on in the brain. And there's all sorts of literature out there looking at the EEG, or the brain waves and the brain conditions of mediums. And generally, the research suggests that ESP and mediumistic phenomena may be associated with slightly differences between the cerebral hemispheres, with a little bit of support in the right hemisphere as opposed to the left. What we mean by that, if you can picture the brain, you've got the left and the right hemispheres of the brain. What normally happens is that what the literature seems to suggest is the activity seems to increase on the right side of the brain rather than the left side. Okay, that's what the evidence seems to be suggesting. And so the problem is, of course, the equipment used is very expensive and not very portable. You've seen all the headgear and the 18-channel or 32-channel EEG. It can be very expensive. And so what I like to use is something very smaller, a lot smaller, very portable. As I said before, I like to do sort of like field research, which is basically take the research out to the medium. And what I use is this. It's a little Muse system. And what I'm going to do is just present some information that I did presented at the Society for Psychical Research annual conference in 2019. And what I use this headband here. Here we go. This headband here. And we use this to see what's going on in the medium's brain as they're going into trance. And I use software called OptiBrain that provides a lovely picture over there. You can see that there. That's the front of the brain up there, and that's the back. You've got the left side and the right side. Now, the colours represent the amount of activity going on in the brain at that point. So blue being very low activity, so not a lot happening. Green being sort of like average, and red being a lot of activity. So it's like a stimulated effect. And so what I did was I took this equipment and I took it to a load of trance mediums, and I said to them, right, I'm going to provide you with some recipients, and I'm just going to put this headband on, and I want you to do your thing, basically. I said, just do what you do. And we got some readings from it. So let's have a quick look. So I took some readings. I've done this about 22 times now with different mediums over a number of years. And so what I've got here is just some examples of some of the things that we actually find. So what we did was with these mediums was we took a plot, basically took the activity, a snapshot of the activity when they weren't doing a trance reading. And so you've got one medium on this side, and you can see it's very symmetrical. There's a lot of activity on the sides here. Looking at that now, I can tell the medium that this came from was very nervous because that's the activity on the sides, very much the emotion centres. The medium on this side, however, you can see it was actually quite low, the green and the blue. So this medium was quite chilled out before they started, quite relaxed. But what was interesting was when they went into trance, what happened? Look at this. So this medium one, remember what they were before? So very symmetrical. When they went into trance, you can see the activity shifted completely over to the right side. So there's a lot of activity on the right side compared to the left side. Now, interestingly, the second medium, different gender, different age, different experiences in terms of where they developed their trance mediumship, but they showed exactly the same profile. A lot more activity on the right side as opposed to the left side. And we see that consistently with trance mediums, okay? We see consistently with the mediums that, depending upon the level of experience, I should say, we see more activity on the right side compared to the left side. And it seems to be an indicator of some type of trance phenomena occurring. Well, I thought that was quite interesting, so I thought, well, what I'll do is then, I'll do this first. So, as I said, this is the stats bit. For 22 mediums, there was very little difference between the left and right brain, between the mediums when they were before the trance, and then at the trance side of things, there was a significant difference between the left and right. So basically suggesting we can use this sort of equipment to research mediumship. But I also thought it would be interesting to look at someone demonstrating mediumship as well, see what happens in the brain there. And so when they started demonstrating, we got a bit of activity, okay? So we saw a little bit of right activity here. And as the mediumship demonstration continued, you could start to see more activity on the right side. Okay, and then when they started to finish or come to an end, you could see the right side again active but less. So you've got this sort of like this wave, if you like, of mediumship appearing in the demonstration of where the activity starts on the right side, builds up, and then as the medium finishes the communication, starts to wane away. Another example here was, has anyone ever seen a spirit artist work? Yeah? Well, this was a spirit artist is someone who's able to draw portraits of your loved one in spirit, okay? This particular person I had here was what's called a trance automatic spirit artist. And what they did was they would sit down, put a board with paper on their lap, hold 2 pens, and would go into trance. Their eyes would be closed, and they would go into trance, and both hands would be drawing away, and it would be a portrait of a loved one in spirit. Now, what was really interesting was, when they first started, they were relaxed. There was nothing there at all. There's a little bit of activity, but not a great deal. As soon as they picked up the pencils and started drawing, the equipment stopped working. Completely stopped working. But the equipment was fine. It wasn't a problem with the equipment. It was a fact, for some reason, the equipment was not picking up any activity going on in the person's brain whatsoever in those points that this equipment was using. But then as soon as they put the pencils down, the equipment came back. So we knew it wasn't the equipment causing the problem. There was something else going on. Okay, very quickly here, because I'd like to move on to something else here very quickly. I've got 10 minutes. Why is it always the case? I feel like Willy Wonka, that line where it says too little information, not enough time, or too much time and too little information, or that sort of scenario here. So as well as looking at this information, there's other software we can use as well. And we can use software, instead of looking at a picture of the brain, in that sense, we can look at the frequencies going on in the brain, okay? Are there any meditators here? Okay. Are there any meditators here who want to demonstrate their meditation? Oh, quiet again, isn't it? Would you like to? Yeah? Come, yeah, please, would you mind? Okay. And your name is?
Kathleen.
Kathleen. Okay. Kathleen, say hi to everyone. Okay. Okay, so we can also look at the frequencies going on in the person's brain as well. And we can use this software, and this is going to change over and work beautifully because that's how it works. It is, thank goodness for that. And we can use this software here and look at the frequencies going on in the person's brain. Okay, here we go. Great. So I'm just going to pop this on, okay? Would you like to just put that on for you?
You can do it.
Okay. Okay, so it's, okay, excuse me. So, right, so what we've got along the top there is the frequency. Now, I'm sure we've all heard about the alpha, delta, theta, and all these sort of brain frequencies. And so we can see the brain frequencies going on here. Okay, you okay?
Perfect.
Perfectly good, jolly good. Okay, now then, what we're actually measuring is time as it's going up, and the colours represent where the activity is relating to the frequency. So just to clarify, down here is the delta, okay? Then you've got the alpha, beta, gamma, and so forth going up. And what we do, for now, all we're interested in is looking at the differences, okay? So this is, sorry, your name, my memory, this is Kathleen's brain you're seeing here, okay? What a marvellous brain it is too, okay? But what we're looking at here is what's going on in the frequency. So we're going to look at the normal rate here. Now, Kathleen, would you be able just to take a deep breath and just relax and just go into a meditation? And we'll just see what the sort of activity's like after a little bit of meditation. This line you're getting down the middle here is an artifact from what's going on, okay? Now, what you should be seeing is slowly more of the blue starts to come. And this is the blue, meaning the person's relaxing and the activity's slowing down. Okay? Can you see that here? Yeah, you can see more blue coming up. You can see over this side here, there's not so much red. It wasn't so as broad as it was. And what you generally find with meditators is that activity just quietens down, as one would expect, okay? Comes down quietly. And you can start to see the blue starting to form up. So, however, if I said to Kathleen to open her eyes for me, just come back, okay? And then, for example, go through the 12 times table in Spanish, and you can start to see now that the brain activity is starting to come back, the heightened sort of activity coming back again here, okay? And see, what you can see with this is that you can use this to measure the activity. So whether you're a meditator, whether you're an astral projector, whether you're a remote viewer, whatever you do, you could put this equipment on and see what's going on. So there's a slight stress response there, so you would think you're listening to what I was saying, yeah? Because you can see the spikes there, okay? So you can see actually real life sort of streaming data of what that person is thinking and what they're going through at this moment in time. Okay, all right? So, thank you very much, okay? Thank you very much. Now, of course, another interesting thing you can do with the Muse, very quickly, is have you heard about the phenomena influence at a distance? Yes. Yeah, remote staring. Rupert Sheldrake talks a lot about this. And you can do the same thing here with this equipment here too. If you've got a group of people together, okay, and you put the Muse on one person, and you took that one person and you put them in another room, okay, so they don't know what's going on, and just have them sit there with the Muse on in another room, oblivious to anything, their brain activity might be like that. But you know what a real killer is? That if you asked everybody else in the other room, this other group, to start sending healing or start sending thoughts out to the person, that person, brain activity starts to register. Even though they have no conscious awareness of what's happening, their brain frequency will start to register, so respond to it. So it's almost like an unconscious level. And of course, Rupert Sheldrake, I believe, refers to this as remote staring and talks about it as being something that is an evolutionary trait within us, because it's kind of useful to know as hunter-gatherers, perhaps. If we were hunting the woolly mammoth, it might have been nice to have some type of unconscious feeling or something if we had a saber-toothed tiger stalking us as well, So it comes from some sort of evolutionary perspective. Books, if you're interested, I find very interesting. The Science of Life After Death, that was only recently published, I think, last month, and a Mysterious Minds book that talks an awful lot about trance mediumship by Stanley Krippner and Harris Friedman. So, ladies and gentlemen, in this presentation, I've attempted to demonstrate that we have been told about mediumship and survival is not the full picture. That contrary to the sweeping generalizations and the ridicule, when we analyse the body of survival evidence through mediumship with a rational, rigorous and open mind, it is ridiculous to deny the conclusion that survival of human consciousness or physical death is a fact. In fact, survival in most cases is the most natural explanation for the phenomena of mediumship. Unfortunately, time is too short to explore why organisations and the media insist you didn't know about the truth surrounding mediumship, but that is probably for another talk for another time. But now I'll just leave you with the inconvenient truth, but profound truth, that psychic phenomena and mediumship phenomena is real and that we don't die.